There is a cave in southern Siberia where human beings lived for 300,000 years. Not visited, lived, generation after generation, through ice ages and warm spells, through the coming and going of animals that no longer exist anywhere on Earth. Families slept on that floor, children were born on it, people ate there, argued there, buried their dead somewhere nearby and got old and died and were replaced by people who did all the same things. And in all of that time, across all of those lives, the entire physical record they left behind of their own bodies amounts to 8 fragments of bone and tooth. 8. You could hold the complete skeletal evidence for 250,000 years of human occupation in one cupped hand and still have room left over. For a long time, that was simply the deal you accepted. Bodies do not last, bone is fragile, scavengers are thorough, and water and acid finish whatever is left. The people were gone. Not gone in the ordinary sense, everybody's gone, eventually. Gone in the sense of unrecoverable. Entire populations, whole societies with languages and jokes and grudges and favorite places to sit, reduced to a few chips in a laboratory drawer. Then somebody had an idea that, on paper, sounds like a waste of a research grant. Test the dirt, not the bones, not the tools, the floor, the ordinary gray sediment that excavators had been carefully removing and setting aside for 40 years, on their way to the interesting things. The floor was full of people. I want you to see this place properly because it is almost certainly not what you are picturing. Denisova Cave is not a cathedral. It sits about 30 meters above the right bank of the Anui River, at a point where the valley narrows and the limestone comes down close to the water. You walk up a slope through grass and scattered trees, and there is an opening in the rock face. Inside is a main chamber, roughly the size of a modest apartment, with 2 side galleries running back into the hill. Light comes in through the mouth. There is a natural chimney in the roof that lets smoke out, which is to say, it is a good house. Dry, defensible, warm enough, with a river below it and game in the valley and a hole in the ceiling that means you can have a fire without choking. Nobody built it. It was simply there, offered, for anyone with the sense to take it. The Russians named it after a hermit called Denis, who is supposed to have sheltered in it in the 1700s. The older local name is better, Aju Tash, Bear Rock. Everybody wanted this address for 3,000 centuries. If you stand in it today, the first thing you notice is that the floor is gone. Where the ground used to be, there is a stepped trench, cut straight down through the deposits like a slice taken out of a cake, and the walls of that trench are striped, bands of gray and brown and rust, some as thick as a mattress, some as thin as a paperback. Each band is a stretch of time. The pale ones tend to be the cold spells. You are looking at the ice age in cross-section, from the side, the way you would read a page. In the deepest gallery, the cut goes down well past head height and keeps going. Now here is the thing nobody tells you about dirt. A teaspoon of cave sediment contains very roughly trillions of fragments of DNA. Almost none of it is human. It is bacteria, fungus, plant matter, rodents, bears, hyenas, the entire biological churn of a place over an unimaginable stretch of time, all of it broken into pieces so small that, for most of scientific history, nobody thought there was any point looking. But somewhere in that mess, if the chemistry cooperated, if the water never washed through, if the cold held, there are pieces of the people who lived there. Because think for a second about what a floor actually is. You shed. Constantly, invisibly, every hour of your life. Skin, hair, blood from a scraped knee, fluid from a wound, the mess of a birth, the slow chemistry of a body that eventually stops. You do not have to die in a room to leave yourself in it. You only have to live there. Bones are the exception, the freak accident of preservation, the 1 in a million survival. Skin cells are the rule. Which means the floor of that cave was never the absence of the people who used it. It was the accumulation of them. Every year, a little more of everyone who passed through, pressed down into the layer below, sealed under the next year's dust. They had been walking on them the entire time, and this is the part I find hard to sit with. Russian archaeologists have been excavating that cave for 4 decades. Meticulous, Grid square, on your knees, work with brushes and trowels, season after season, in a cold chamber above a river, in a country that has been through several versions of itself while they did it. And for most of those years, the sediment was the obstacle. It was the stuff you removed in order to reach the stuff that mattered. Bag the flint, bag the bone, the dirt goes on the spoil heap. That was not carelessness. That was the entire discipline of archaeology, doing precisely what it had been trained to do since it invented itself. The answer was in the spoil heap. And to their real credit, the moment the possibility surfaced, the team at Denisova did not get defensive about it. They started collecting the dirt as though it were treasure, which is what it was. The method arrived in 2017, and the trick behind it is beautifully simple. You build a kind of molecular hook out of modern human mitochondrial DNA, drop it into the soup, and let it grab anything that looks even distantly like a relative. Then you read whatever comes back up. The first time anyone ran it properly on Pleistocene cave sediments, it pulled Neanderthals out of the ground at 4 different sites across Europe and Siberia, including a cave in Belgium that has never produced a single Neanderthal bone. Not one, not ever, only their tools. For a century, archaeologists had looked at those tools and inferred a people. Now the people themselves were in the soil and had been the whole time, waiting for somebody to ask. And at Denisova, the same technique found Denisovans in layers where no Denisovan fossil had ever been recovered. That should have been the story. It wasn't, because a few years later, the same group went back and did something much more ambitious. They decided to sample the whole cave, not a handful of test spots, a grid. Dense, systematic, 3-dimensional, across all 3 chambers, every layer, every level, each sample bagged with its exact position logged, so that later, in a laboratory 4,000 kilometers away, somebody could point at a speck of gray dirt and say precisely when it settled. Just collecting them, and writing down where each one came from, took more than a week of continuous work inside the cave. Then the boxes went to Leipzig, and Elena Zavala spent the next 2 years of her life on them. 2 years. Clean rooms and airlocks and full body suits, because a single flake of a living technician's skin can drown out 90,000 years of a dead child. Extraction after extraction. Sequence after sequence. 728 samples of Siberian floor, processed one at a time, looking for a whisper inside a scream. 175 of them had people in them. I keep coming back to that ratio because it is the part that genuinely rearranged something in my head. Roughly 1 scoop in 4 of that cave floor still contains a human being. And this is where it stops being a technical achievement and becomes something else entirely. Because when you line up those samples against the ages of the layers they came from, you do not get a data set. You get a guest book. 250,000 years ago, the first entry. Denisovans. They are the ones who made the oldest stone tools in the cave, and we can say that now with confidence because their DNA is sitting in the same dirt as the tools they left behind. That question had been argued about for years. The floor answered it. They stay. For tens of thousands of years, it is their house. Then the weather turns. Around 190,000 years ago, the climate slides out of a warm phase and into a cold one, and the sediment records the entire reshuffle in a single stretch of layers. The hyenas change, the bears change, and a new kind of human walks in through the mouth of the cave. Neanderthals. And notice what arrives with them. Not just people. The hyenas change. The bears change. The entire cast of the valley turns over in the same layers. At the same moment, the cold sets in, and the floor holds all of it together. The weather, the animals, the humans, as a single event. Because it was a single event. That is what a bad century looks like from the inside. The winters stretch out, the herds shift, the predators follow the herds, the people follow the predators, and one afternoon, somebody who has never seen this valley in their life comes over the ridge and finds a limestone cave with a chimney in the roof. I love that the ground kept all of them. Not only us, everyone who used the room, and they genuinely did share it. This was never a human house with human tenants. Between occupations, the cave belonged to hyenas and to bears, who denned in it and dragged things into it, and left their own contributions to the sediment we are now reading. Some layers are ours, some are theirs. You would come back up the valley at the end of a hard season and have to work out, at the mouth, whether tonight the cave was yours. And then, this is the part I could not stop thinking about. They overlap, not for a moment. For an enormously long time, the dirt holds both of them together. Two different kinds of human, in the same small chamber, in the same layers, using the same fire hole in the same roof. Then a gap. Somewhere between 130 and 100,000 years ago, the Denisovans drop out of the record completely. The climate swings warm again, the animals turn over again, and for a long stretch, the cave belongs to Neanderthals alone. When Denisovans finally reappear, they are carrying different DNA, not the descendants of the ones who left, a different population entirely, somebody else's family moving into an old house, and then, around 45,000 years ago, in the layers where beads and pendants and worked ivory and ostrich eggshell suddenly start appearing, us, and the floor settled something else on the way, an argument that had been running for years. In those upper layers, the excavators kept finding ornaments, pendants, beads, worked animal tooth, mammoth ivory, marble, colored stone, ostrich eggshell. Somebody in that cave was making jewelry, drilling it, shaping it, wearing it, presumably looking at other people wearing it and having private opinions about it. For years, nobody could say who. The obvious guess was us, but Denisovans had been in that chamber since long before anyone else, and Neanderthals for a very long stretch after them, and any of them could have strung those beads. Without a body in the layer, it was guesswork dressed up as consensus, so they tested the dirt around the ornaments, modern human. The first appearance of us at the site, right there, in the same handful of centimeters as the beads. We turned up carrying a new technology and a habit of decorating ourselves, and the ground quietly recorded the order of events and held on to it for 450 centuries. Now go back to those 8 fragments of bone, 8 scraps, out of 300,000 years of continuous human life. That is the entire yield. By any reasonable expectation, they should be 8 anonymous nobodies. 8 random chips that tell you a species was present and nothing more. One of them was a girl. She was about 13 years old. She died roughly 90,000 years ago, and what survives of her is a piece of a long bone smaller than the last joint of your thumb, weighing less than 2 paper clips. It sat in a tray for years, in a box of more than 2,000 unidentified fragments, because it had no diagnostic shape whatsoever. It looked like nothing. It looked like gravel. When they finally read what was inside it, they found something nobody expected to find in 100 lifetimes of digging. Her mother was a Neanderthal. Her father was a Denisovan, not a faint genetic echo, not ancient admixture smeared across 1,000 generations. A first-generation child. One mother, one father, from 2 branches of humanity that had separated something like 400,000 years before she was born. She is, to this day, the only one anyone has ever found. And what gets me about her is not the genetics. It is the ODDS. Think about the chain of accidents required for us to know she existed. Her body had to survive the cave. A fragment of it had to be excavated from a floor that has been sifted grain by grain for 4 decades. That fragment had to be kept in a tray with thousands of others that looked identical. Somebody had to decide it was worth testing the anonymous gravel. And the molecules inside it had to survive 90,000 Siberian winters intact enough to read. We have 8 fragments, 8, and one of them is a first-generation child of 2 different kinds of human. You do not draw that card from that deck if it was rare. If mixed families had been a freak event, a strange one-off, a story told for a generation and then forgotten, we would never have found her. The mathematics simply does not work. The only way you pull that girl out of a sample of 8 is if the cave was full of children like her. If it happened over and over, for thousands of years, in that chamber, and in 100 chambers like it across Asia, which means the picture most of us were taught is wrong. I learned this as a story about species, separate branches on a diagram. Neanderthals over here, Denisovans over there, modern humans arriving later to replace them both. 3 different kinds of creature, occasionally colliding at the edges of their territory. That is not what the floor says. The floor says it was a neighborhood. They lived in the same valley. They used the same cave, sometimes within the same handful of generations. They met. They worked out how to make themselves understood. They had children together, and those children were raised by somebody, and at least one of them lived to 13 and died in the East Gallery and stayed there for 90 millennia until we came and picked her up. There was no border. We invented the border. We invented it much later, in journals, with Latin names, and there is one more detail about her that I find almost unbearably human. When they compared her mother's genetic signature to other Neanderthals, it did not match the Neanderthals who had lived in that very cave earlier. It matched Neanderthals from thousands of kilometers to the west, closer to Europe. Her mother's people were newcomers. Somebody's daughter traveled an enormous distance across Eurasia, ended up in a limestone cave above a Siberian river, and had a child with a man whose family had been living there, on and off, for 200,000 years. That is not a species boundary. That is a love story with terrible record keeping. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, the stories where the whole case rests on something smaller than a fingernail, that is most of what I make here, and subscribing is what keeps them coming. Now let me tell you what the dirt cannot do. Sediment DNA is a presence detector. That is all it is. It tells you somebody was standing here. It is astonishing, and it is almost completely mute. It cannot tell you her name. It cannot tell you whether her parents' families approved, or whether anyone thought the pairing was strange, or whether it was so unremarkable that nobody commented on it at all. It cannot tell you what language filled that chamber, or whether there were two languages in it, or how a woman from the far west and a man from the Altai worked out a shared word for fire. We have a girl with no name, from a people with no name, because Denisovan is our word. We borrowed it from a Russian hermit who slept in their house 250,000 years after they left it. Whatever they called themselves is gone. And that word was spoken in that room, out loud, thousands and thousands of times. It just wasn't the kind of thing that survives in limestone. I catch myself making a list of what I would ask if the floor could talk instead of only point. Not the big questions, the small ones. What did you eat first thing in the morning? Who slept nearest the fire, and did you have to earn that spot? What did you do with the children while the adults were out on the slope? Did the girl with the two lineages know she was unusual, or was that simply what a family looked like, where she grew up? None of it is recoverable. It never will be. The dust can tell us that a human being stood in one particular square meter of ground during one particular millennium, which is already a small miracle, and it can tell us absolutely nothing about what kind of day they were having. And then there is the question underneath all of it, the one nobody has answered. Why did they stop? Not why did they die? Everybody dies. Why did the line stop? These were people who lasted 250,000 years in Siberia. They lived through repeated ice ages in a place that still kills the unprepared. They spread from the Altai across to the Tibetan plateau, thriving at altitudes that would put most of us on the ground gasping. They were, by any measure that matters, extraordinarily good at being alive. And then, somewhere around 50,000 years ago, in roughly the same window that we turn up, they thin out and go quiet. There are ideas, climate, competition, being absorbed into larger populations, simple bad luck in small numbers, which is how most things actually end. None of them has won. The honest position is that a kind of human being who outlasted us many times over disappeared, and we are still standing in their living room, holding a bag of their dust, trying to work out what happened. For 15 years, there was one more absence that bothered everyone involved. We had their genome, we had their tools, we had their DNA in the floor, mapped layer by layer. We had no face. Then one turned up at the bottom of a well in China. In 1933, a laborer working on a bridge over the Songhua River, in a region under Japanese occupation, dug a heavy, unusually thick, almost complete human skull out of the riverbank. He understood exactly what would happen if he handed it to his overseers. So he took it home, dropped it into an abandoned water well near his house, covered the well, and told nobody. He kept that secret for 85 years. The bridge was finished, the occupation ended, wars came and went, regimes rose and fell, the country transformed itself several times over, and the skull sat in the dark at the bottom of a well in a family's yard. The man grew old, he had children, and his children had children, and in 2018, dying, he finally told them what was down there. They went and got it. They gave it to scientists. And after years of argument about what it was, some calling it a new species and others insisting it was Denisovan, a team scraped a speck of fossilized plaque off its single remaining tooth, an amount you would need a good microscope to see, and pulled genetic material out of it. It matched. Sit with that sequence for a second. A laborer in occupied China, with absolutely no idea what he was holding, looked at a strange, heavy skull and decided that whatever it was, the soldiers were not getting it. So he hid a Denisovan at the bottom of a well to protect him from an army, and then guarded that secret for the rest of his life. He was right. About all of it. Heavy brow, wide, flat face, enormous eye sockets. A brain case as large as yours, or larger. Not a monster, not us, and honestly, looking at the reconstructions, not even especially strange. It looks like somebody's grandfather. That is the face. That is who was walking around on that floor. And here is the last thing, the part I would want you to take with you. They are not gone. Not completely, not even close. Around 4 out of every 5 Tibetans alive right now carry a Denisovan gene that lets them breathe comfortably at altitudes where the rest of us would be lying down. In Papua New Guinea, as much as 1/20th of a person's genome traces back to them, threaded through immune systems, through metabolism, through the machinery of how a body handles cold and thin air and disease, in millions of people who have never heard the name of that cave and never will, which means that somewhere out there right now, a climber is going up a Himalayan slope on lungs that work properly because of a man who lived and died in a cave in the Altai before anything we would recognize as history had started. He never knew. She never knew. Nobody involved in that transaction had any idea it was happening. They did not vanish. They dissolved into the sediment of a hillside in Siberia and into the blood of people currently reading text messages on the other side of the planet. So come back to that floor with me one more time. Gray, packed hard, utterly unremarkable, the exact kind of dirt you would scrape off your boots without a second thought. In the deepest gallery, it goes down more than 8 meters before it hits rock. Every centimeter of it is somebody. The Denisovans who moved in first and stayed 100,000 years, the Neanderthals who arrived when the cold came, the second wave of Denisovans, strangers with a different lineage taking over an old address, the girl with the Neanderthal mother and the Denisovan father, the people who showed up 45,000 years ago carrying beads made of ostrich eggshell and mammoth ivory, who were us and who kept coming. It isn't dirt, it's everyone who ever slept there. If 250,000 years of people can survive as nothing but dust on a cave floor, what do you think we've walked past and thrown away everywhere else?